So this project started as a toolbox. The toolbox was handed down from generation to generation. It mostly sat in a closet, but every now and again I would get it out because it was a physical connection that I had to my family history. It belonged to Henry F Hees, and he was a carpenter as a hobby. He built things like this that was refurbished in the 70s and a kitchen table that we still have. But every now and again I would get it out and just think about what life was like and what my great-great-grandfather was like. Henry F. Hees was born in 1880 in Detroit, Michigan. His father, John Hees, came to this country at 4 years old from Germany. I'll do a part 2 that talks about John and John's father, Johannes. But as far back as I could take it, it looked like growing up, Henry F. Hees lived in this area of Detroit, Michigan, just a little bit northwest. None of the houses still exist, but it's very likely that Henry would have lived in a house very similar to this one, based on the census records and some of the houses in the area that still exist. And this would have been the area that Henry Fred lived in. This is quite possibly the oldest photograph in the Hees family collection. This is from around 1895. This is Henry Fred and 2 of his siblings. It is possible that John and Henry knew a thing or two about precious metals since their father was a jeweler. John Christian set out to the west, possibly in search of gold, got out to Anaconda, wrote his brother Henry and said, "You need to come out here, there's opportunities." So Henry Fred followed. The earliest census records for Henry F. show him working and living at the Park Hotel in Great Falls, Montana. At the time, he was a hotel messenger. Henry was also an athlete. He played baseball, and he was on the Great Falls, Montana baseball team, which I'm sure had a name, but nothing was written on the back of this picture. He was also a boxer. This was a newspaper article talking about an upcoming fight, and this was an article talking about the results of another fight. This is Montana as Henry Fred Hees knew it. Somewhere around 1906, Henry Fred met the love of his life, Tone Cleve, also known as Tilly, which we'll get into a little bit later. Growing up, we were under the impression that Henry Fred met a lady in a bar and got her pregnant, but going through these old photo albums, we can see that wasn't the case. She was also an assistant chef on some early census records and later on a chef. They would have lived at this address for a short period of time, and also this one, which still exists today. 1907 saw the birth of my great-grandfather, Henry Hiram Hees. With new responsibilities comes better employment, so Henry Fred Hees joins the Anaconda Mountain Fire Department. It was apparent that Henry Fred kept in touch with family members, just like this letter suggests. And a year prior to Henry Fred leaving Anaconda Mountain, John Christian left and went back to Detroit. It's also possible that John Christian suggested Henry Fred come back to Detroit to work for the Ford Motor Company. Henry Fred moved back to Detroit in this blue house on the right side on St. Clair Street. This is a picture with Henry Fred and the family that he rented the house from. Now, over the next few years, Henry Fred had a few different employers, but for the most part, he worked for Ford Motor Company. In 1928, his father would pass away, leaving him the property at 727 Pennsylvania Avenue. In 1944, they would sell the house on Pennsylvania Avenue. In a very short time later, they would buy the house that they would retire in. Henry and Tilly moved into 4106 Woodworth. Now, Henry worked as a parts clerk, a parts checker, according to some census records, and at the Gilmore Car Museum they had a picture of what one of these parts desks would have looked like. Henry started his career at this factory in steel stock and would spend 30 years at Ford Motor Company. His later years would be as a parts clerk. Not long after retiring from Ford, Henry and Tilly would celebrate their 50th wedding anniversary. In the article, it said the couple met at a dance in Great Falls, Montana, and were married in 1906 in Bozeman, Montana. More than likely, the dance was at the Park Hotel where they both worked. Henry and Tilly would spend the rest of their lives in the home they purchased in 1948. In 1961 was the passing of Henry F Hees, and just 3 months later, his loving wife, Tilly.